And here we are again.
Yes,
the
and
man with the
hello.
clapperboard there lets us in.
Yeah, and this wet, windy evening, Craig.
So, hi everybody from nice rainy Winchester. We're going to be talking tonight all about ancestors and raise a few spiritual thoughts and questions about ancestors and their influence upon our destiny. And Jane and I are going to talk a little bit about who do you think you are sort of thing when we look into some of the stories from our past as well and things like that. So perhaps we should start off by saying a few hellos, shall we, Jane?
Definitely. Right, Frank. Hi, Craig and Jane from wet and windy Poole,
just down the road from us. Yeah, it is. It's all down the south coast at the moment, isn't it?
And Susan, Simpsonville, South Carolina, you say in the house.
I wonder if there's a real place like Simpsonville. The Simpsons are always, of course, a great one. Did you ever see the predictions the Simpsons made?
No. Did Mr. Burns do?
Oh, yeah, there's loads
Mr.
of
Burns
the Simpsons has made some serious stuff on predictions. Actually, it predicted Donald Trump, for example, on there being president.
Good evening, Kay.
Whispers of Serenity.
Claire. Hi, Craig and Jane from Sutherland. Claire.
Sunderland.
Yeah.
So good to see you all guys coming on board here from all over again.
Hello from Colorado, US. Cadena.
Well, there we, no, we've got another one. Ethel's there still.
Good evening,
good.
Craig
Hi,
and
Ethel.
Jane from West London.
Yeah, so we got it all over the UK tonight. Hence we put the fire on tonight for ourselves here, because it's so cold and miserable here in the UK. But we're here to cheer you up as normal. And I'd like you to have a think out there about any questions you might have and thoughts you might have and things about your family trees, because it's been quite interesting lately, because Jane and I've already had a lot of research done on my family tree because of my dad did a lot of work on it, albeit in a right state and a right mess, but I know the main stories. And I'll tell you a few things about that. But we just recently found quite a lot out about one side of Jane's family tree, which has been quite interesting. And it brings up some pretty unusual and interesting things. You know, you start to see echoes there of yourself sometimes in these family trees, I think. And I think that's what's interesting. So we'd like to know about some of your stuff later on. You know, have you got any things that have strange that have happened in yours? You know, has there been something strange, something paranormal, something very unusual? Be lovely to hear about that as we go along, and any questions as we start to raise a few thoughts about this and issues about what it means.
Right.
So what did we find in yours then recently,
Well, I'm quite
Jane?
interested in DNA through ancestors and how it passes through to generations, and we've gone back as 1800 and things, and Craig got about 64 cousins, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's in real
they
life.
didn't have
now,
television in those days.
Yeah.
And so we started with my grandmother, my granny, Ethel Winifred Wallace, and I found out that she had a relative that emigrated to Canada in 1894 and joined the Royal Canadian, is it Dragoons? Dragoons. And I had one relative that was killed in, where's that, Craig? I can't read that. In action.
I can't read.
In action, 1918, the battle in France. What's it, the famous battle in France? I can't read my cousin's
Armain. Yeah,
Armain.
I can't pronounce it either. Ypres was the other one nobody can ever pronounce.
What really struck me with these brave men, he was hit by a bullet to the head, and his other brother was in the Royal Horse and Field Artillery, and he actually went to Australia and then joined the Imperial Army. And then on my other relatives linked with my grandmother is that they were all nurses and midwives, and there was one very, very brave
but you want
nurse.
to tell people, Jane, because remember, you spent a large part, not everybody knows this, you spent a large part of your life as a nurse, didn't you?
Yes.
You did quite a career as a nurse.
Yes.
You did for a long time, didn't you? And there it is, kind of already coming out. You weren't in the dragoons at all, were you? Or the cavalry?
I thought you said the goons.
The goons or the dragoons. But it's the nursing thing that I think is interesting, isn't it?
Craig.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that also they were in the police force, as mounted polices because they all emigrated. But what I found most fascinating of all, I had a cousin who was a military nurse, killed in 1942, and it was hit by a Japanese boat in Singapore. They never found her body, and she was a nursing sister, and she went down with the boat, and there's actually a plaque of her in London, and there's war medals, and she's got a blue plaque, and most of them going on our side of the family that's in military have all got the George's Cross, but the nurses, and it goes all through to midwives, up there, army officers, naval officers, and nursing. And it quite shocked me actually, because I know my grandmother used to deliver babies and done midwifery, but she was also, everybody would knock her door, and she used to do readings with tea leaves and different things in those days. But it really struck me how brave these people were. And there was another person that was linked up to the brother that actually was what they call a gunner and a horse galloper, and he got shot as well in service. So that's where all the tidiness comes from, Craig, why I'm so tidy and efficient.
So
comes through the nursing order.
OCD runs in the family
No
then?
OCD, methodical person.
But it's interesting, the nursing stuff, because that's what you did as a career before, and the healing aspect of it, really.
Yeah.
We know your grandmother was medium. Well, she was very interested in mediumistic things. I don't think she would have called herself a medium, but
Well,
she
they didn't
was
then.
very,
It had to be
very
secretive, didn't it?
interested in those type of things. And there wasn't anything else I think we found on
but
that,
what
but then
was
it doesn't say that in the records,
Yeah,
does
but
it?
what I'm going to actually do, go to Greenwich, because they have got records there, and actually see if I can get photographs of them and put them up. But what interested me about nursing, my grandmother, in those days they were very sort of, couldn't afford vets and that, and they used to, if a cat cut itself, they used to stitch them up and do things like that.
Yeah.
And attend to them. But all the nursing, and I thought, well, that's gone through the DNA. And also really interesting, a lot of them came from Kent, Plumstead, and a lot of them emigrated to Australia and Canada, and I never knew about that.
But you didn't know about the nursing history in your family when you decided to become a nurse, did you?
No.
I mean, you became a nurse spontaneously.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of interesting, because it makes me think, is there such a thing as a kind of a destiny that runs in families? You know, is there something that kind of follows you like a group soul for the family? Yes, we got genetics, but, you know, is there something that kind of pushes you along a path because something comes up already that follows your family? Like they talk in the Bible about the sins of your fathers. You know, you'll be punished for the sins of your fathers. Although Jesus renounced that and said it wasn't that.
What I found fascinating, we only found out about this Sunday when we went to visit my cousin with my mother, and there was pages, and I was outstanded because, you know, nobody tells you things, and they didn't take photographs going right back.
That's
in the
right.
1800s.
Yeah. Well, my dad checked mine out, and Uncle Keith, my uncle, checked it out as well. And there's quite a few of the stories in the family still carry on, because most of my family, the main thing was we traced ours right back to the 1600s, and actually right the way back, right far back, the Barbary pirates.
That figures.
Yeah, Barbary pirates. Well, they were the Ottoman Empire pirates coming up mainly from Morocco. They used to raid all the bottom of Cornwall and Penzance and that, and they got as far as Southampton and stole people into slavery. So I want reparation for my slavery background. Everybody else is getting onto this supremacy. One. I think there was 1.2 million Europeans put into slavery by the Arab people between the 16th and the 19th century. So I want reparations. But anyway, apart from that, I'm going to go and have banners. But apart from that, no, they raped the people of Southampton. A lot of the people, they raided Southampton. And in the Parker family, because it's Hamilton Parker, but Parker's my main surname, all the way back, there's every now and again somebody gets swarthy skin, sort of Araby looking skin, you know, and that's they say is the legacy of the rapes that were done in the family, in the Parker family, from the going back to the Barbary pirates.
And I forgot also they trace that my mother's mother was a Forsyth, and that's from a part of an aristocratic family. So she married beneath her, and her family cut her out completely.
So you were lucky you had some aristocrats. No aristocrats in my family as far as we know. There were supposed to be copper mines in South Africa connected with the family, but we never found them.
No.
They did tell. I tell you, my dad tried to find them. But I think some of the most interesting ones is the fact that, you know, my family is based in Southampton, so we've got a lot of really interesting stories associated with the sea. And my granddad on my dad's side of the family, so Granddad Parker, he had a fabulous story. His story was he went down, he was on as a cabin boy with his brother Bill on the ship called the Rohilla. Now the Rohilla is a very famous story for the lifeboatmen in Whitby, because Whitby, they had the lifeboat stations there, and the Rohilla, this was around, well, I've got the date down, was it 1914, 30th of October 1914. It was a hospital ship coming back from the First World War with all the wounded troops on it. It got into trouble, it hit the rocks, and it started to sink. And this was the last time, in a huge, terribly bad weather, this is the last time they actually had the rowing lifeboats out to go out and rescue the people on the boat. And they tied my granddad as a boy. The captain put the uniform on him because he was cold. He put his own uniform on him, the captain's uniform, and they found him tied up in the captain's uniform onto the railing so that he didn't get washed over into abroad. And they got him and rowed him back. And they couldn't get the lifeboats out, so they had to take the lifeboats down the side of the cliff faces in order to launch the lifeboats, because they had nowhere they could launch them because the sea was coming in so. It was a real story of bravery. It going down at a place called Saltwick, which is just down from Whitby in Yorkshire, which I thought that's one of the most interesting stories, and that's not far back. But there's all these stories in my family, on that side of the family, of sailors and things. I found out my great-granddad was the captain of the Kaiser's yacht. Now the Kaiser's yacht doesn't sound much, but that was like the Queen's yacht. You know, it was a steamboat. You know, it was like a what was it? I've got the right name of the Hosenzoll or something. And then others, there were stories of people that the captain who went down his ship on the Enterprise was another boat that went down. They ran the America's Cup. They were in Camper and Nicholson. They had involved with the Gypsy Moth, which was the one that went across. They were the skippers of Ted Heath.
I've always felt one of your incarnations was the press gang.
Yeah.
I've always felt that in German, in the press gang. Always felt that.
You know, you've said that, but I remember the medium Peter Close said that to me. Said, I thought you were in a submarine. He said in a previous life, he said to me. I've never thought that, but certainly in the blood, with all these sort of really stories that go all the way back on that side of the family. Any other things from yours you got told?
Only about that boat that got hit by the Japanese boat.
The Japanese stuff's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's I found that really fascinating, and I found it terribly sad as well.
The only mediumistic stuff I found in my family was my great grandmother, she was mediumistic. She came from O'Leary. That was on my nan's side of the family, and she came from Cork in Ireland. And then on my granddad's side of the family, they were all mappers. They mapped the 49th parallel across Canada. So I found that fascinating too, that they were explorers. My granddad, he went to Nigeria, and First World War, he was too young to go to the trenches, and they hooked him out because he enlisted too young. He enlisted about 14 years old. So they sent him off to Nigeria in the Ordnance Corps to draw the maps of Nigeria. And they sent him out on a horse with a gun and a group of people to carry his stuff and things. And he had incredible stories to tell. I remember as a child him telling me how he shot his horse. You know, how to shoot and kill a horse. He'd tell me, you know. Thanks, Grandad. Well, real useful, you know.
And also, the Royal Artillery and horses and that, I've always had horses and always done jumping and things. So it makes you wonder in your DNA, doesn't it? Because I used to do dressage, and I used to do jumping.
Yeah, because of the horses. Yeah. And of course, I think I've been I've always loved travel, and it's in both sides of the family. There's travel. I've always loved adventurous travel. I've loved, I mean, I'm explorations of India and things, but I love the Indiana Jones sort of style of life, you know, and that's what my granddad lived. That was his type of lifestyle, really. And I think it's fascinating. And then you come to dead ends every now and again. Like, I think there's a few in your side, wasn't there, too? But my great granddad, Mapson, he was an orphan, and he always wondered, where did I come from? You know, he used to say, I'd give £100 to anybody that could tell me who my father was, you know, and because they kept it all secret then, they wouldn't release the records.
But don't forget, in that time, if we go right back, some children put in workhouses and the lines broke down, or illegitimate children. But you can research all those records through Bernardo's now, because they're allowed to release all those.
I'd love to get those, actually. It'd be really, really interesting. Yeah. Well, we're going to go on one of our little out and abouts now. So I'm going to show you another little video clip. You know, we have these little video clips. Well, this is something I made a while back, and I've kind of edited it down a bit, about an unusual story that happened in my family tree. And this one relates to Edgar Allan Poe. And it was also featured in the film The Life of Pi. And anyway, you'll find out about it. I'm going to put this one on for you now, and then we'll get some of your stories then, guys, if you can. But here it comes. I'm just going to put this next little video on. We go. So today we're at the Itchen, the River Itchen in Southampton. This is Woolston, where my relatives go right back to the 16th century. We actually were the ferrymen that used to row the people across the water here. Now, I'm going to tell you the story of Richard Parker and our connection in the family with Edgar Allan Poe. And some really gory stuff is going to come up in this story. So if you don't like that type of thing, turn off now. And if you're watching this video, something weird could happen to you once you hear this story. Now, most of you have heard about Edgar Allan Poe. He was a really bizarre sort of guy and wrote some of the most strange stories of all time. And he was way, way ahead of his time. And he had a strange life himself, actually. He was an orphan. His parents died when he was 4 years old, so he had a lot of kind of hang-ups. He lived a life of real poverty as well, grinding poverty, and was one of the first authors ever, the first author, they say, American author. So first that was self-sustaining, you know, he lived it as a professional career. And one of his first novels, I think it was his only novel actually, was called Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. Okay, it was a story of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, which is a weird sort of story really. It's about a shipwreck that went wrong, and the 4 crew had to abandon the ship and were basically stuck on a raft. And because they were running out of food, all they could catch was a turtle, and they caught the turtle and carved it up and ate it. And gradually one of the people on the ship, on the boat, was dying. So they thought, well, we're going to kill him and eat his body. So they cut his hands and feet off for some reason in the story and throw those overboard. And then Grizzly's tale in great detail of eating the body of the boy. Now, the boy's name in that story was Richard Parker. Remember that name, because that's going to come up again in a minute. Now, Poe wrote the story of Arthur Gordon Pym, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket in 1838. So it was quite a weird story to write in that time. But many people thought that Poe had this ability to see the future. He actually believed he could see the future himself, and believed that he was kind of constantly in a state of seeing things that were going to happen. And in one of his short stories, Eureka, he actually talked about the idea of the expanding universe, and lots of the ideas that he came up with often came to true in science and all sorts of things. He's a really, really weird bloke. He had all sorts of strange fears too, like a fear of premature burial, for example. So Poe, in this story, we believe was seeing the future. Now, my cousin, Nigel Parker, spotted in this story of Poe a very similar thing to what happened in real life nearly 50 years later. So Poe in this story foresaw something that was going to happen, and my cousin Nigel Parker spotted the story and sent it to a man called
Arthur Koestler. Now, Arthur Koestler was a very famous paranormal investigator in his time. Koestler set up the chair of parapsychology in Edinburgh University. And Koestler saw this and seized upon this idea because what he spotted in this was a very, very weird coincidence. And it's the coincidences in this story that are even more remarkable than the strange premonitions that Edgar Allan Poe had. Now we're going to go and see if we can find the grave of one of my family members here in Pear Tree Churchyard near Woolston in Southampton. So this is Pear Tree Church, and in the graveyard, I believe it's just around the corner there, there's the gravestone of my grandfather's cousin, it was, whose name was Richard Parker. And a very strange thing happened to him that actually mimicked the story that Edgar Allan Poe had described 50 years earlier. Let's go and have a look and I'll tell you all about it. Okay, let me tell you about Richard Parker. You remember he was in the story of Edgar Allan Poe in his book that he wrote 50 years before these events I'm about to tell you happened. Now, Richard Parker was my granddad's cousin. And as a young man, he ran to sea like they all did. My granddad ran to sea. Many of them in this area of Woolston went off in the boats to Southampton. Now, Richard Parker went off as the cabin boy at the age, I think he was 17 when he went to sea, and he went on a boat that was heading for Australia. It was owned by a millionaire Australian. He wanted to get the boat there. It was a sort of yawl, they described it as, a sort of a smallish boat, 4 crew including him. And on the way to Australia, it got into trouble in the South Atlantic seas, and the boat started to fall to bits, so they decided they had to get off the boat pretty quick. So they all jump into the life raft. Now, the life raft could take the 4 men, but it had no supplies. So they told Richard Parker, go on, you go in, lad, and get some water while we get the rest of it done. So he went to get water and ended up bringing in 2 tins of turnips. He couldn't get water. And the rest of the crew, who was Captain Dudley, someone called Stevens, and someone called Brooks, all 4 of them get onto the boat. And then it gets into trouble. And they start sailing out into the South Atlantic, and gradually, over many, many days, they start to starve and, most importantly, die of thirst. Now, Richard Parker, it was known that you must not drink seawater, but Richard Parker drank some of the seawater. Actually, Stevens drank some of it as well, but he began to get into more and more of a comatic state, you know, and the sailors between them started to say, now, you know, how are we going to survive this? So Captain Dudley, who was a very sort of moral and upright sort of man as far as I understand, he was really debating this in his conscience about what to do. He had a lot of religious background to him as well. He decided that we should draw lots and decide if one of us should die. Now this is almost a mimic of the story that happened in the story by Edgar Allan Poe, because they drew lots in the Edgar Allan Poe story. They also, the only food that they got was a turtle, and they divided up a turtle, just like in the Edgar Allan Poe story. And they drew lots to see if one of them would die and be eaten. So the 3 other sailors decided to eat Richard Parker, mainly interested in his blood because they were dying of thirst, which they poured into a bucket and drank from the bucket, rather than eating his body. So this kind of story has many other aspects to it, but it's kind of haunted our family history. I'll tell you a little bit more in a minute about what happened after they were picked up by an aptly named boat called the SS Montezuma. Oh, well, that was quite an interesting thing. He's going to get the key so we can have a look at the original stone. And as I was saying, they were so embarrassed about this whole idea that their family had been connected with this story, this is the Dudleys, that they decided to put a fund up so the gravestone could be looked after forever. And actually Dudley, who was the captain, you remember, he was the captain who decided to draw the straw so that they could eat Richard Parker. He went off, after they did all the trials and things like that, he went off to Australia and he lived as a sort of a beachcomber. And they say he went completely bonkers and lived, I used to call him Cannibal Tom, because it was Tom Dudley. And he used to wander the beaches in a sort of wild state, story said. So yeah, so Edgar Allan Poe saw all this happen all those years before, 50 years before. So many little details that were true in this story that keep coming out. And what a strange coincidence to actually meet somebody who actually remembers the Parker family in this area. Oh, thanks, yeah. Yeah, this has been 1833. This has been the sort of time of Poe, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I was telling about the Poe story and how Edgar Allan Poe foresaw it all in his book, in the narrative of the Reverend Davies. I bet perhaps he was the man that buried him. Look at him. He looks a weird character, isn't he? So we're going to have a look at the gravestone itself. Thanks. So you get a lot of the law students come out to see it then?
They don't come in. They've got a lot of emails. I get a lot of emails from them. So they...
Oh, here it is. Yeah, okay, yeah. Now, so I remember, even that's been cleaned up. Because last time I saw it, it had ants all over it.
It had a huge crack.
Crack was in two pieces, wasn't it?
So...
Yeah, and it doesn't say quite as much on there. It doesn't mention cannibalism, does it? Because that era, they didn't want to mention that. No, everybody ignored it. And it just said, what did it say? Though he slay me, I trust in him. Though he slay me, I trust in him. So he's been murdered. Lord laid not this sin upon their charge, that's into their charge in Acts. Yeah, so, you know, so there was talk of sin even in the grave, wasn't there? Well, that was really fortuitous that someone should be there that actually understood the story and knew all about it and could show us the stone and so forth. But when he gave me his email address so I could send him a link to this video, he cut his hand and there was blood all over the paper. So he actually signed his email address in blood. The strange coincidences with this story never cease.
Well, there you go. I said I'd cheer you all up.
I found that quite horrific, actually. Imagine being about and someone kill you and drinking your blood.
Yeah,
awful.
Yeah, and that blood at the end, you know, wasn't that strange too?
Very
That he
strange.
signed it in blood at the end. That was the weirdest of things. You know, that my dad had the Two Eyes restaurant, didn't he? My dad used to say about the story, he said that was the first time the Parker family went into catering. The first time we went into catering.
I'd really like to hear, you know, patrons or people about their stories.
Yeah, we'll hear some of your stories,
you know,
guys, in a moment.
The genealogy of
I mean, let me just seed a few thoughts about this, you know. I mean, there's a story covered in coincidences. I mean, have you heard any weird coincidences happen in your lives, for example? Because that story, I mentioned a few in that little clip, but there's so many weird coincidences that have associated with that story. I wrote the story once up for a magazine called Fortean Times. So I wrote an article in Fortean Times. And everybody that read the article started getting weird coincidences happening to them, that they started writing into the Fortean Times to say, this weird thing happened to me and that. And in my family, I mean, the weird, you know, there's, it would take too long to explain them all, but there was just so many odd things happen. If you watch that story, I guarantee you will get some weird coincidence associated with something to do with Richard Parker or Edgar Allan Poe or blood sometime soon. And you can't look for it. It will suddenly it'll happen, and it'll just bang you. It really is almost like a magical story. It's the weirdest of things, and that's what Arthur Koestler got interested in. You know, because
just
so
watch
much
out
happened.
for the ravens, eh?
Yeah. Well, The Raven, of course, was written by you.
I know.
Yeah.
I know,
So you don't say we might find on our way home we have an accident and our eyes being plucked out by ravens. So it was a weird one, but you know, does something follow the family? You know, I mean, that story did seem to follow our family, because weirdness follows our family from that story. Honestly, all sides of the family have discussed and described really horrible experiences that seem to associate every time we mention this story and every time it comes up. So, you know, are the curses that run down the generations, maybe? What do you think about that idea? Has your family ever had a curse run down the generations that follows one after another, like the sins of the father? Or does destiny follow a family tree? I mean, like destiny followed your family tree in some ways, the fact that you were nurses there. Yeah. It's like, was there something there that meant you had to become a nurse?
I didn't start out to want to be a nurse. I really, when I was younger, wanted to be a nun.
And there's no nuns in the family tree then?
Well, not if I know so
far. There might be, we might find out. We haven't looked at your father's side of it yet, have we? And they say that genetics can't carry experiences, they say. But there's been some experiments done, I believe, where they reckon that one generation of worms can pick up trauma from a previous generation of worms, that it's passed down through their genetics. So can perhaps memories, traumas, experiences, skills, perhaps, like nursing or whatever, artistic skills, be passed down, not through the genetics, but something else maybe? Do we pass on perhaps a genetic DNA?
Well,
an auric DNA.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to a doctor yesterday, it came from reading, and we were talking about organs and things, and I said, I wonder if somebody has a heart transplant or kidney transplant, liver transplant, if they don't take on that persona of that person who it used to belong to.
Yeah.
Their DNA, and I've often, because I'm quite interested in DNFA and things, and we're talking about cancers. Everybody's born with a cancer gene, but it's something that triggers it off HI9E, something like that. So I was really interested in that. But
that's interesting that people have transplants and they carry the memory of the person's whose heart they've been given, for example. You know, and they start having. I mean, there's lots of. I haven't researched it, so it would be quite a good one to do, wouldn't it? But you know, the memories that have associated with these things have often been very specific things, not just generalities, but real feelings of that personality. And they start finding they have an inclination to do things that person did. You know, suddenly want to do ice skating or something like that.
Yeah,
you know, that it gets some sort of strange connection with. So it makes me think: is there something more than just the genetics of the body? Do we also perhaps carry, like I say, almost an auric DNA? As well as our soul that comes into this body, is there also like an energy that's being passed from one generation to another? Something energetic in the physical body, and also something energetic that jumps from soul to soul. You know, that's why it's part nature, part nurture, and part body and part soul. Who knows? We are a strange makeup. So there's some thoughts for you guys. Let's have some of your thoughts. Let's have anything that's happened to you on anything like coincidences, synchronicities, strange things in your family tree, questions about those sort of things. And what do you think? You know, how do we evolve? Do we evolve just through genetics, or is there something else there? Okay.
The one who seeks finds. I was told that I was a professor in a prior life, and it comes really easy to me. Love what I do. Yeah.
So, who knows? I think we do, don't we? I mean, when we talk about previous lives, I mean, I've always felt I've been certain things in previous lives, and I don't know whether that could be fantasy. Of course, it could be fantasy, but there seems to be. Why are we drawn to want to do certain things in life? You know, I think it's more than the genetics, and I think it's something that we've carried with us. You know,
I mean, like you got a thing about India. You could have been Indian in past life. Very interested in writing, and archaeology and that, and all these things you might brought it through in this life.
Yeah, well, from my point of view, I mean, like I've said before, the Nadis, that really blew my mind with all this type of thing, because, you know, it told me past lives, and those things corresponded in many cases to things I'd already remembered, I'd already known, and I felt it was a real confirmation. Sometimes with a psychic reading, it comes up in a person's reading, something said about a past life or something, and they say, yeah, that's exactly what I felt happened, you know, and I've had dreams about that place or that event or being that person, you know. Unless we're reading their mind, you don't know that. We could be reading a person's mind, but and it's very hard to qualify these things unless you can actually get down to the records, like they did in things like the Bloxham tapes, where they did hypnotic regression for people, and they took them to the places they remembered, and they were able to describe what was going to be, you know. For example, the one that really I found fascinating was a woman that went back to believe she was in Ireland centuries ago, and she was in a barn there, and she said the floor has this design, and she drew this design that was supposed to be on the floor, and there was nothing on the floor, and they had to dig down the floor because it was feet and feet of chicken poo that had been there over the centuries. They got that, and the very design that she'd drawn was on the floor under centuries of chicken poo, so it could never have been faked up because this was solid impacted chicken poo. And she was speaking, as she got there, she was speaking in an old form of Gaelic. You know, what they call exoglossy, where a person's speaking a language they don't know. So yeah, I think we do carry forward all sorts of things, don't we? I think some of it's through our family tree, some of it's through our family's energy, and some of it's through our past lives.
Your ancestors are very important, because if it wasn't for your ancestors, none of us would be here. And the Chinese people, very important, and Indian people, very much with their ancestors, because they line ghost chairs out for their ancestors to come on certain celebrations.
Yeah, most cultures have worshipped their ancestors, even ours, but we've forgotten about it nowadays.
Right.
Maybe we're doing something wrong. Christina, hi. I think an imprint in the etheric body can be transferred into the physical body in the next incarnation. For example, birthmarks can manifest on a body from past life wounds.
What happened to us?
Or can there also be an etheric imprint through the family tree as well? That's what I'm questioning here. Do we also, you know, do we get it from past lives, or could we also get it from the family tree? Something, a trauma that's been passed down through the family that kind of energetically follows the family. And definitely past life wounds. You were going to say about, we had a mark, didn't we?
And Danielle.
Yeah, we all had a mark on the back of our neck in the same place.
Same place.
And when we met, we talked about that we both had a similar dream of being attacked from behind, and swords from behind cutting our heads off in old France. And I still can see it now with the dogs attacking us, and the and a moat, and being pushed into it, and then as we're falling, they hack us from behind.
Danielle had a birthmark, and she's very interested in archery and axe throwing.
Yeah, where did she? Well, yes, these things. Of course, all daughters are interested in axe throwing and archery, aren't they? Yeah. But that's her big thing at the moment. Yeah, they're great. Mind you, I think she's getting some of the aggression out of her system from people that have done her wrong.
Pretty good at it, though.
Yeah, that's a great one, Christina. Yeah, so I think the etheric body can transfer physical things onto the physical body. In fact, the whole physical body might be a collection of energetic things from previous lives, and the illnesses we get are somehow in our auric field and eventually affect our physical body. And that's why having good thoughts, having healthy thoughts, having positive thoughts influences the etheric body that influences the physical body, and may help prevent trauma from previous lives coming into our body. And why they say in yoga that, you know, the breathing, particularly spinal breathing they call it, cleanses those energetic forces and stops them manifesting as illnesses in our life. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Agility bits, Patch. My brother called his firstborn Julia. He had no idea that a number of our ancestors were called Julia including our great-great-grandmother. That's very interesting, isn't it? Because that would be quite an unusual name if we go right back, if we went back 300 or 400 years, because most of them were known by Ethels, Winifred, Ethel May, Grace.
Yeah.
And
Actually,
everything.
that's a really good point
Yeah.
there, Pat. Gilly's bit's called Pat, we know, because she's a patron. Become a patron, have a look in the description below. Yeah, that's an interesting point, though, because if you think about it too, twins that have been orphaned and separated at birth, who know nothing about their family tree, have called their children the same names without having any reason to do that. So you look at these twins and you find them again. They both had children. They've married women with the same name. They've had children and named them by the same name. Now, could there be something in this idea here of like this idea I was talking about here, that energy follows a family tree? Do those twins separated at birth, is there something in their family that's followed them there to make them name people? And exactly the same there with what Pat said. You know, why did her brother call the firstborn Julia, and that name is prevalent throughout the family tree, and he didn't know it. So that's interesting, because it kind of reaffirms that as an idea, doesn't it? That we carry, we carry names.
I think my mother was going to call me Gabrielle.
Gabby.
No, Gabrielle. I'm glad she didn't.
Yeah, they were going to call me Fraser, and of course that would have been great.
No, what's that one Gone with the Wind? Your Mum Light. That was the famous person.
No, they were going to call me Fraser.
No,
That's what my granddad wanted to call
Fraser,
me, Fraser.
The one that the Scarlett O'Hara falls in love with him, and that.
I can't have forgotten his name now.
I'm
I can't
glad
remember.
she didn't,
You shouldn't ask me. You know what my memory for film star names is terrible.
Name. No, what was it now?
See, when you're doing this, you forget things. I can see why they struggle on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Mark is saying, hi Craig and Jane, is mediumship connected to your ancestors and your current family members in both your family trees?
Oh.
Well, up to a point, but the problem is they don't put it on the death record. So all we know is from what people have said. And I know from my family tree that my nan said that her mother was very into mediumship. Very, very interested in it. On my auntie's side, but unrelated in a way, they were also knew Arthur Conan Doyle, so there was connections there.
Who was that auntie?
Brenda, but she's not connected directly in the family. So that was they knew Arthur Conan Doyle, and she used to, as a little girl, sit outside while they were doing the circles inside, because she's only a little girl or something, or her mother did or
Craig,
something.
the name's come to me. I must tell you, Ashley.
Ashley, okay, right. I don't know. Right, anyway. None of those names are as good as Craig, a nice strong man's name.
Craig means the rock in Scottish.
So I've completely lost it now. Oh yeah, and there we go. Yeah, so there have been things. It's Conan Doyle, and they also set up a spiritualist church somewhere going back. But actually, I don't think that mediumship is genetic. Actually, I know they say the seventh son or the seventh son, and people like to play on things like that, but I don't think it is, because I think there might be some quirks, because mediumistic people are often very artistic, and I was very much into art. I was accepted into St Martin's Art College in London and things. So I was very, very dedicated, and I did exhibitions and things. That was my career for a long while. So a lot of mediumistic people kind of have artistic leanings, particularly painting, and nursing leanings as well has also been found a lot when there was a Professor Einznick did a load of studies of this, I believe, and looking for what people profess things. So often creative people, also gamblers as well, tend to also have mediumistic likelihood. So perhaps there's some genetic thing in it, but I think it's work done in previous lives that gives you it's work you've done in previous lives that gives you the siddhi powers that come into this life. I think, but I don't know. And can any of us ever answer that, really? Probably not. So keep your questions coming, guys, because as It looks like we're running out of questions because you've all sat back there enjoying this, or you've all switched off or gone to sleep. But let me just sort of just say to you as well, you know, while you're thinking of a few questions, because you know we can do all sorts of things like coincidences as well. We haven't covered that yet. We should perhaps talk about that in synchronicities. Why not become a patron? Because if you have a look in the description to this video, you'll see there's a little link there to our patron pages. And if you become a patron, you can help keep this channel bubbling away and moving forward, and it really does help. Some of the names coming up on the bottom of the screen, I must update some of those because we've got some new people come on as patrons recently too. So it'll give you a little access into an area where you can watch extra little clips and things like that. But most importantly, it helps us to keep all this going, helps us to get the equipment together, helps us to keep this very expensive, although small, studio in Winchester going, which is a very high priced area. So we're really grateful to all of you that are helping us, and keep going and have a look. You know, it don't cost much and it just helps keep it all going. If you watch it every week, you can stop feeling guilty and think, yes, I give a little bit to Craig and Jane every week. I'm supporting this. I feel good about it. And also we do try to do a lot of charitable work with our work too, with any of excess funds you'll see. And we should cover some of that sometimes and do some videos about that in the little 10-minute breaks,
especially with the children.
Yeah, feeding people and things like that. So yeah, we should do one on that. So anyway, so that's one of the things we do. So keep your posts coming and give us some questions. So yeah, that Richard Parker story was really interesting because of some of the coincidences that are associated with it. I remember there was one, you know, when people watch that story, like I said, you're going to get some weird stuff happen, I expect. But my dad was was talking to some language students. He had some language students, the Spanish language students that came and were staying at our house. And he was talking to them, and the story of the Richard Parker came up on the local news. They did a little clip about it every now and again. It's an interesting story, and local story, so they were talking about it on there. And my dad said to the language girls, I think there was 3 of them there, he said, and he said to the girls, oh yeah, that story is really weird, and started to tell them the story that I've told you in that little clip there about Richard Parker and about Edgar Allan Poe. And all 3 of those girls had actually gone out, and each one had bought a copy of the collected works of Edgar Allan Poe. Now, whoever goes out and buys the collected works of Edgar Allan Poe, let alone 3 of them buying the collected works of Edgar Allan Poe together, there must have been, I mean, how do you find those copies there? They all had a copy of it on them. In it was the story of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. So that was just the possibility of that happening was just mind-boggling. And then often I remember telling somebody about the story, actually, because for some reason we started talking about sea stories and things like that. And I told them the story, and they were studying law. And I said, have you ever studied the story of Richard Parker? Because, you know, this rose so many questions, and lawyers do have to study it to this day, because it asks, you know, questions about when is it right to kill someone? Is it ever right to kill someone? Because they killed him so the others could survive. And I was talking about it, and he said, my God. And we said, come over here. And he took me over to the desk, and open on the desk was the story of Richard Parker that he was having to study for his legal degree that day. I've mentioned it to other people, and then I've walked by and a book fell off the shelf. What was it? It was Cannibalism and the Common Man, a book about cannibalism. Open it up randomly, and there's the story of Richard Parker. I mean, these coincidences seem to haunt this story and kind of follow it. And I think sometimes, you know, if you get some legacy in your family of some sort, something odd, something strange, the thing follows you. It's like a ghost. It's like a shadow from the past.
I was wondering if actually Richard Parker wasn't haunting you all.
Well, that was another question. Could he have been following us? His soul would have been pretty restless, wouldn't it, when you think about it? You know,
yeah, that's one for you,
17 years old, it said. He was 16 when they killed him, I thought.
17?
Yeah.
Died.
Must have been right on his birthday, because it was right.
Well, you don't know it's his birthday. It didn't say on the gravestone. Right. Do you want to read this?
Yeah, and I remember just another thing from that too. The Dudley family went to Australia, Dudley went bonkers and he became a cannibal. They called him Cannibal Tom because he had eaten Richard Parker, and he became a beachcomber. Dudley, who was the captain, drank the blood of Richard Parker to survive, and he agreed to that they should draw lots to eat him. And he went bonkers afterwards and went to Australia, and they called him Cannibal Tom. But his family, the Dudleys, out of guilt, decided they would look after the gravestone and left a legacy so the gravestone could be maintained. And apparently they would only ever clean that gravestone at night time when there was no one around, because they didn't want to be associated with the story. It was a weird story. Anyway, years back, I watched Michael Saunders' lectures on YouTube, and the Parker case was used as an example. Later discovered you, and you told the story.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, so you got a synchronicity even with our video.
It's good, isn't
I mean, I have put that full version of the videos up on the site there. So already we got one, you know. Next week, maybe, when you come and see the show, if you get a weird coincidence that happened from today's show, let us know, because it would be very interesting, because I bet we'll get a few. Or leave something in the comments. Have you had a weird coincidence happen in your life? You know, has something strange happened to you that you just can't explain by any normal causal connection of events? So we're getting closer to the end now, so we'll have to take some last questions.
Pat, I think mediumship runs in families. It seems to be fairly common in my family, and it's not always welcome. Well, I think it depends, doesn't it? Once again, like I'm talking about my grandmother, used to be able to read tea leaves, and also very knowing. She could sense spirit and hear spirit, so it does make you wonder sometimes, like Pat's saying. But I think it could run in families, but to me it feels like it's a gift that's given to you for the power of good.
I think it comes through lots of spiritual work in the past.
Yes, past lives.
But I think sometimes mediumship does seem to come to some people who frankly have no moral standards, and yet they can still do mediumship. And I'm not saying their mediumship doesn't work. It does, because they still give evidence of mediumship. But I know of a number of mediums who I won't name, but I know of a number who I've thought were not the best characters, as it were, you know, and didn't seem to have very high moral values in their life, and yet they were still mediums. But so I think mediumship is perhaps nothing to do with being highly spiritual. Perhaps it's a power that comes. It can come, you know, Aleister Crowley used to get his powers, alleged powers, through doing all sorts of terrible acts, because he always believed it triggered powers without having to do the work. You know,
as you would say, he would be a want-to-be celebrity.
He was a pretty mixed-up person,
of course he was,
and he died. He
drugs,
it didn't do him any good in the
poverty.
end. He died in poverty in Eastbourne, didn't he?
Yeah, but he came from a very rich background, and he ended up in a guest house in Eastbourne and died a lonely old man.
Yeah. So does mediumship run in families? Yeah, well, I think it can do, but I didn't in mine as far as I'm aware. I mean, I've said those things, there have been things there with spiritualism in the family.
Like you say,
so
it's from previous incarnations, and it depends what you've done in previous incarnations to come back and do good karma in this incarnation.
Yeah. I suppose, see, I kind of discovered it through my Auntie Marion, and she was very into psychic things and sat in circles, didn't she?
Yeah.
So I suppose you could probably say the influences are there in the families. But is it a genetic thing? I don't think so. I think it's a spiritual thing, isn't it?
I think so.
And I think it's things that have come from things we've done in previous lives. What do you think? Have you had? Do you think mediumship comes that way, or does mediumship come, you know, just out of the blue? Is it just something that just seems to be a quirk? I know one or two mediums and psychics have said that often mediumistic powers have come after they've had a blow on the head.
Have you had a blow on the head, Craig?
As far as I know, I haven't. My memory can get pretty bad sometimes. No, the wind did change direction. But Uri Geller said that he had a blow on the head, I believe, and so did Matthew Manning, the healer.
Oh, sorry,
and
come
so
up.
did
As
a
you
few
were
others.
talking, that one's just come up.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Bloody hell, fancy that. So you're in sync. You're in sync.
Yeah, some people do have things.
Or I'm in
happening.
sync. One of us is in sync. You know, either you know I was going to say that,
And
or I picked up you'd said it.
Another study is when children, some of them have had epilepsy, and they've gone through puberty. Some of them turn out to have psychic powers or be mediumship. Who've had epilepsy.
And sometimes people also who have had near-death experiences. I remember doing some interviews for a magazine. They pulled me in to talk about it with someone who'd had who reckoned their psychic started getting psychic powers after a near-death experience. I mean, I suppose if you've had a near-death experience, it opens you up to the knowledge rather than just the possibility that life carries on after death. And I think sometimes it's the barriers we put up to mediumship can sometimes be caused by our own disbelief.
Another one's come up as you're talking, you haven't read it. Look at that.
Bloody hell. What's wrong with you guys?
Yeah, look,
I'm very tuned in,
it.
or they are.
Not
I think they're very
screen.
tuned in. They're picking up what I'm going to say.
See?
We've got a load of people here doing predictions as I'm speaking. So you're saying these things and we're talking about it. Oh, God, look at that. Isn't it weird? But you see, we're talking about synchronicities as well, aren't we? So it might not be anything to do with psychic powers, that little incident there. It might just be somehow the arrow of time has gone a little bit awry for a while and it's not going quite as we would like it. It's like often when you talk about dreams, you'll have a dream. When you start talking about weird bends and coincidence and things, they kind of start happening. And they're not happening because you're making things fit. They kind of happen in the weirdest possible ways. Coincidences come whether we like it or not very often, you know. So next week's show is going to be a nice little coincidence. It happens that we do it every Friday. So don't forget to join the show next week, guys, because we're coming to the end of the show now very shortly. So thank you for joining us. It's been a very interesting debate, I think, discussion. Don't forget...
Not a debate. It's not
discussion, not a debate, no. But we'd like to have some debates. I've got some people that would like to come on the show. And if anybody wants to come on the show, I can do some shows with you on Zoom. Like I've got one of Freemason that wants to come on to talk about Freemasons aren't lizard people. That would be quite interesting if you're still up for it. And other people that would like to come on the show and have chats, we can do it by Zoom and do that as well. Some of those.
And
can
I've
be
got a
on
very
the...
interesting doctor that wants to talk about in the future about menopause, how you can control that when with the mind and doing all these different things. Holistic things.
Well, I'm sure that I find a broad audience. Particularly, I'd be very interested in that one.
But not just that, with yoga and all different things.
Yeah.
How it can help people. How the mind is quite a powerful tool. It's like your own built-in computer. How you do visualization, how you do these things. It's not just women with like menopause. It's sort of like women, how you can control, because some people got illnesses and they can change their lifestyle and what they eat.
Well, it might be nice to do a show on mind over matter, and how we can heal ourselves and how we can lose lose weight by mind over batter.
This is mind over batter. Oh, well, you don't matter if it's mind over batter.
Anyway, I think it's time to go. So thanks for joining us, guys. Thanks for being part of it. See you next week.
Ciao.
Bye for now.